Good evening, traveler. Tonight, let us walk softly beneath the silver light of the moon into an age long faded, yet never truly gone. An age of wandering rangers, of forgotten paths, of silent forests where even the wind dared not speak too loudly. Tonight's tale is not one of great battles, nor of thrones claimed in fire and glory, but of the quiet years, the unseen years, the lost moments in the life of a man who walked between two worlds. He was a king long before he wore a crown, a warrior long before songs were sung of him, a shadow in the wild, known by many names, yet understood by few, the Strider, LOTR, Aragorn. In the deep hours of Middle-earth, when campfires burned low and the stars watched in silence, there were stories never written in the great chronicles. Stories carried only by whispers, by memory, by the soft crackle of embers in the night. Stories of doubt, of loneliness, of choices made when no one was there to witness them. So settle in, dim the lights, let the noise of the world grow distant, and as sleep slowly finds you, allow your thoughts to wander through mist-covered valleys, through ancient ruins, through forests older than memory itself. For tonight, we uncover the lost tales of Aragorn, and if you find peace in these quiet journeys through myth and legend, you are always welcome to remain, subscribe, and walk with us again into worlds where stories never truly end. Now, rest easy. Our tale begins. There was a child once in the hidden valley of Imladris who bore no crown and whose name was not yet his own. He was called Estelle, Hope. And in that fair house beneath the sheltering cliffs, where the sound of falling water was like distant music, and the air held the memory of elder days, he ran as lightly as any boy might run. He learned letters beneath carved beams older than many kingdoms of men. He listened to songs of Baron and Luthien, though he did not yet know how closely those songs would one day bind his own fate. To him, Elrond Hathelven was lord and guardian, wise beyond measure and gentle in counsel. Of his true father he was told little, save that he had fallen in battle against the servants of the enemy. Of his lineage there was silence, and silence in that house was never without purpose. For Estelle was not as other children of men. In his face was the clear line of Numenor's blood, though softened by youth. His eyes held a depth that seemed older than his years, gray as a winter sea beneath cloud. The elves who watched him in secret knew what lay hidden in his name. They had seen such faces before, long ago, when kings walked tall in Middle-earth and the white tree still bloomed in the courts of Minas Tirith. Yet no word was spoken to him. It was not yet time. He grew in wisdom as he grew in strength. The lore of ancient realms was taught to him. The tongues of elves and men he mastered. The histories of Arnor and Gondor he studied with a keen and quiet mind. Often he would wander the wooded paths alone, climbing the ridges above the valley to look eastward where the world rolled away in blue and shadow. There was in him already a restlessness, not the impatience of youth alone, but something deeper, a pull toward distant lands and unfinished tales. When he heard of the North Kingdom long broken, his gaze would darken with thought. When the fall of Gil-galad was spoken of, or the last alliance upon the slopes of Orodruin, he would listen without stirring. Elrond watched, for Elrond remembered the pride of Isildur. He remembered too the long defeat that followed, and he feared not the courage of the boy, nor his wisdom, but the doom that clung to the name he did not yet bear. On the eve of his 20th year, the truth could no longer be withheld. It was in the twilight hour, when the light in the valley grows silver and still. Elrond called Estel to him, and there in a chamber lit by quiet lamps, he spoke of Arathorn, son of Eredor, and of the chieftains of the Dunedain of the north. He spoke of the Ring of Barahir, heirloom of ancient kings. He spoke, at last, the name that had been guarded all these years. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur. The words did not fall lightly. Long he stood without speaking, as though the weight of centuries had settled upon his shoulders in a single breath. He had dreamed of greatness, perhaps, as young hearts sometimes do, but this was no dream of bright banners and shining crowns. It was a lineage steeped in loss, a throne long empty, a crown broken and scattered. "Then I am not Estel?" he asked at last. "You are both," said Elrond. "Hope remains, but hope must walk through shadow. And shadow there would be, for in that same hour he learned also of Arwen Undomiel, whom he had seen before as one sees starlight and thinks it beyond reach. Now he was told of the choice that would stand between them, the choice of mortality and the long sorrow of the Eldar. And in his heart love awakened fully, though it was twined with grief. He did not turn away. That night he walked alone beneath the trees of Imladris. The Bruinen flowed dark and cold beside him. Above, the stars burned with an ancient fire, unchanged by the troubles of men. He felt then the smallness of his own life set against a vast years of the world, and yet also its purpose. For though the kingship of Arnor was but a memory, and Gondor had long been ruled by stewards, the blood of Númenor was not wholly spent. It ran still, quiet as a hidden stream. And streams, though unseen, shape a land in time. When he returned to Elrond, his choice was made. He would not remain sheltered in the valley of his childhood. The wide lands called to him, lands troubled by shadow. Lands where simple folk tilled fields, unaware of the watch kept on their borders. If he were to bear the name Aragorn, it would not be in comfort. He took up the Ring of Barahir, and the shards of Narsil were shown to him, not yet reforged, not yet made flame anew. They lay wrapped and guarded, silent witnesses to an unfinished task. "Go then," said Elrond, though sorrow lay behind the words. "Learn what you must. The days will come when knowledge and endurance shall serve you more than pride." Thus began the hidden years. He left Imladris, not as a prince, with escort and trumpet, but as a lone ranger, clad in weather-worn cloak, bearing little sign of lordship. The wild took him into its keeping. The paths north of the Shire, the empty lands of Eriador, the ruins where Arnor once stood proud, these became his teachers. Few marked his passing. Fewer still guessed that the heir of ancient kings walked beside their hedgerows at dusk. He learned the speech of simple folk and the silence of long watches. He slept beneath open sky and beneath broken roofs where owls nested. He tracked wolves across frost-hardened ground and followed darker things that left no prints at all. And slowly, like iron tempered in patient fire, he was shaped. The name Estel did not fade. It remained within him, not as ignorance, but as quiet strength. For hope is not the shout of victory. It is the steady breath taken before the long road. So the heir of Isildur walked unseen, and the world did not yet know that its king had already begun his watch. When Aragorn first left Rivendell, The world seemed both wider and more perilous than ever he had guessed in his sheltered youth. Though he had ranged in the hills about Imladris and had ridden with the sons of Elrond upon guarded errands, this was a different departing. No escort followed him beyond the last turn of the valley path. No horn marked his going. The Bruin murmured behind him, and before him lay leagues of untended land. He was then in the full strength of his youth, though the years of the Dunedain run more slowly than those of lesser men. Tall he stood, dark-haired and gray-eyed, and there was already in his bearing something of command, though he wore it lightly. Yet he bore no sign of rank save the ring of Barahir, and that he kept hidden. His garments were plain and soon weather-stained. Thus he went forth, not as a prince, but as one of the rangers of the north. The lands into which he rode had once been the heart of Arnor. Now they were broken country, long stretches of heath and bramble, fallen towers half swallowed by earth, roads that led nowhere save into grass. Here and there dwelt scattered folk, hardy and suspicious, who tilled thin soil and spoke little of the past. To them the rangers were a strange people, seen at dusk upon distant ridges or passing silently along hedgerows. They were neither welcomed nor wholly shunned, but they were not understood. Aragorn learned swiftly what it was to be mistrusted for doing good unseen. When wolves gathered in harsh winters, it was the rangers who thinned them. When darker creatures crept from forgotten ruins, it was the rangers who followed and drove them out. Yet thanks were seldom given, for often those protected never knew their peril. At times he rode with the Dunedain, grim-faced men of few words, bound to him by blood and long loyalty. From them he learned much that no lore book could teach: the reading of subtle tracks upon stony ground, the measure of distance by the tilt of sun and star, the patience of waiting without fire in bitter cold. They spoke seldom of kingship. Their chieftain was their leader, not their lord, and Aragorn did not press his claim. He would earn his authority in deed, not demand it by birth. But there were other journeys also, taken alone. He went far into the North Downs and stood upon Amon Sul, where once the Seeing Stone had been set. The wind there was keen, and the remnants of ancient walls cast long shadows at evening. He felt then the weight of what had been lost. Arnor had not fallen in a single stroke, but had dwindled through strife and pride, until its people were scattered, and its crown no more than a memory. From that height he looked westward, where the Shire lay peaceful and unaware. The hobbits tilled their fields and smoked their pipes, little guessing how often watchful eyes kept guard beyond their borders. Gandalf had spoken to him of that small land and of its simple folk, and though Aragorn did not yet walk openly among them, he knew already that their safety was not to be neglected. In those years, he came at last to the borders of the Shire in secret, learning its ways and paths. He did not enter its villages save rarely and under guise, but he kept knowledge of its lanes and hedges, for evil had begun again to stir in the world. Rumors drifted northward of a shadow gathering in the east, and of creatures that moved more boldly after nightfall. It was not yet the hour of open war, but it was no time for idleness. Often he would lie wakeful beneath the stars and consider his course. The burden of Isildur's airship lay heavily upon him. The shards of Narsil were kept in Rivendell. They were not yet his to wield. Strength he must gather first, not only of arm, but of wisdom. If ever the crown were to be claimed, it must be by a man known in many lands, tested in peril, and proven in restraint. Therefore his thoughts turned south. The realms of men still endured there. Rohan upon its green plains, and Gondor beside the Grey River. In those lands the blood of Numenor still flowed, though diminished. There he might learn more of rule and war, and measure the strength of the enemy more nearly. Before he set out upon that longer road, he returned once to Rivendell. Elrond received him with grave welcome, and long they spoke together. Of Arwen Whittle is told in the annals of that meeting. Yet it is known that her choice was laid before him plainly. If he would wed her, he must become king of both Gondor and Arnor, for Gulron would not give his daughter to one who would claim less than his full heritage. Thus love and destiny were bound together. It was no light condition. The kingship of Gondor was not his to seize, nor would he do so by force or intrigue. The stewards had ruled long and faithfully. Denethor's father, Ecthelion, with then steward, a wise and vigilant man. To present himself as heir of Isildur might have brought strife before the time was ripe. So Aragorn chose another path. He would go forth in secret and serve where he might under other names, learning the hearts of men and the counsels of captains. His own name he would set aside, as he had once set aside Estel. For a season he would become only a wanderer among many. Thus began the deeper years of his exile. Southward he journeyed, through lands growing more peopled and less desolate. He crossed the gap of Rohan and beheld the wide plains where horses ran like wind over grass. There he served for a time under King Thengel, though little record remains of his deeds in that land. He was valued for his foresight and for the steadiness of his hand in battle. Yet he did not linger long, nor seek advancement, for his road led further still. In time he came to Gondor, and entered the service of Ecthelion II, steward of the realm. There he took the name Thorongil, Eagle of the Star, and by that name he was known among the captains. Swiftly he won esteem, for he was bold yet prudent, and in council he spoke plainly but without pride. Many wondered at his lineage, perceiving in him something of the high men of old, but he gave no answer beyond what courtesy required. Under Ecthelion he led men against the corsairs of Umbar, and in that perilous venture he showed both daring and discipline. Yet when victory was gained and honor offered, he did not press his claim to reward. Indeed, at the height of his renown, he departed suddenly and without leave-taking, leaving behind questions that long endured in Minas Tirith. But those deeds belong to later telling. For in these early wanderings the shape of his life was set, to go where need was greatest, to remain unseen when glory beckoned, and to place the safety of others before his own advancement. He had learned that kingship, if it were ever to come, would not be seized by proclamation. It must be prepared in silence. And so the heir of Isildur walked the long roads of Middle-earth beneath many skies, gathering not wealth nor fame, but knowledge, patience, and the trust of those who did not yet know his true name. Long were the years in which Aragorn bore no name that men remembered. In the north they called him chieftain, and that in quiet council among the Dunedain. But in the scattered villages of Eriador, and in the dim rooms of roadside inns, another name took root, a name spoken half in jest and half in distrust. Strider. It was a name given for his long step and weather-worn cloak, for the way he seemed always to be passing through and never staying. Children would watch him from behind doorposts. Farmers would nod, but not invite him to linger. Some thought him a vagabond, others a wanderer with secrets not fit for hearthlight. He accepted the name without protest, for the work of those years was not to be praised. The north was wide and thinly peopled. Once it had been the heart of Arnor, where towers shone white against green hills and banners flew above guarded gates. Now only broken stone remained, and long stretches of land where wind moved unhindered across heather and ruin. Yet ruin does not mean emptiness. In the hollows of the Weather Hills and in the cold marshes beyond the Barrow Downs, things stirred that did not love the sun. Old evils, lesser perhaps than those of elder ages, but persistent and patient. The fall of Angmar had not cleansed the land entirely. Some shadows lingered, thin but enduring. The rangers knew this well. By night, they kept watch where others slept. By day, they rode far borders unseen. They were few, and their lives were spent in vigilance. No songs were made for them in village squares. If wolves were driven off, or darker creatures turned back from lonely farms, the credit was given to good fortune. Aragorn walked often alone. He would move along the edges of the Shire, where tilled fields lay neat and comfortable beneath the sky. The hobbits did not know him for what he was, and that was as it should be. Their peace was guarded not only by distance, but by hidden swords. Sometimes he stood upon a rise and looked down upon lamplit windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Laughter would drift faintly on the air. The smell of pipeweed might reach him, and for a moment he would feel the strangeness of it, that he, descended from kings, should stand apart in shadow while others lived in simple contentment. Yet there was no bitterness in him. Hope, once his childhood name, had not left him. It had changed its form. It was no longer the bright expectation of youth, but a more steadier flame. If his path lay through hardship, then so it must be. The kings of old had not been crowned in comfort. Winter in Eriador was a stern teacher. The wind came sharp from the north, cutting through cloak and leather alike. Snow gathered in drifts among fallen stones. Tracks were quickly lost. In such seasons, a ranger's worked hardest, for hunger drives both beasts and darker things nearer to habitation. There were nights when Aragorn lay upon frozen ground, listening. The world would seem vast and empty, the stars remote and cold. Yet beneath that silence, he could sense movement, not always near, not always clear, but present. He had learned to trust such feelings. Once in the ruins of Fornost, he stood amid shattered columns while moonlight silvered the broken court. The air was still, yet not at peace. There lingered there a memory of anguish, as though the stones themselves recalled the fall of kings. He knelt and touched the earth, not in grief alone, but in vow. Arnor would not be forgotten while he yet lived, but the reclaiming of a kingdom would not begin with trumpets. It began with endurance. Years passed in this manner. His face grew leaner. His bearing, though still quiet, gained a gravity that made even doubtful men pause before mockery. In Bree he was known well enough, though not fully trusted. Butterbur the innkeeper found him strange but useful. Travelers learned that if Strider warned against a road, the warning was wise. He did not explain himself. Explanation was seldom his way. From time to time, Gandalf sought him out. The wizard's coming was never announced, yet Aragorn would feel it, as one feels a change in weather before clouds gather. Together they would speak of tidings from the east, of a shadow strengthening in Mirkwood, of whispers concerning a creature seeking something lost. These were grave matters, and they were not confined to distant lands. It was at Gandalf's urging that Aragorn gave particular heed to the Shire in later years, for though it seemed a small and untroubled corner of the world, Its very obscurity might prove a snare. Thus, the ranger's watch became closer. He followed tracks that no farmer saw. He marked signs along quiet lanes and erased others that might have guided hostile eyes. He drove away spies whose allegiance was uncertain, and once he pursued a dark figure far beyond the greenway before it vanished into broken hills. No chronicle records these labors. They were not set down in red ink, nor preserved in Minas Tirith. Yet they mattered, for in those silent years, Aragorn learned more than craft of blade or bow. He learned restraint. Many times, he might have revealed more of himself to command quicker obedience. Many times, he might have claimed authority among men eager for leadership. Yet he did not. Kingship, if it came, must not be grasped prematurely. In his heart, there remained also the memory of Rivendell and of Arwen beneath twilight trees. Long years might pass between their meetings, yet her image did not fade. It was both comfort and burden, for her fate was bound to his success, and the path to success lay through uncertainty. There were moments of weariness, when rain fell for days without break, and cloak and boots alike were soaked through. When suspicion met him where gratitude might have been offered. When news from the south spoke of strength gathering in Mordor, and of Gondor standing watchful yet strained. In such hours he would remember the shards of Narsil, kept safe in Elrond's house, broken, yet not destroyed, waiting as he waited, and he would rise again. Thus the Strider years unfolded, not marked by great battles, nor shining deeds sung in halls, but by constancy, by the turning away of small evils before they grew bold, by the guarding of borders none knew were threatened. He became known among his own people, not only as chieftain, but as one who bore hardship without complaint. The Dunedain, though dwindled, were proud, yet even among them Aragorn's endurance stood firm. If any asked him whether he would indeed claim the throne of Gondor one day, he answered little. The time was not yet clear, and the will of the enemy was not yet revealed in full. But deep within him, a certainty was forming. The world was changing. The long watch of the Rangers would not suffice forever. A greater storm was gathering beyond the horizon of these quiet northern lands, and when it broke, wandering would no longer be enough. Until that hour, he would remain what the world believed him to be, a weather-worn traveler, a silent guardian, Strider. And so he walked beneath countless sunsets, while kingdoms elsewhere rose and fell in rumor. He walked through spring rains and autumn mists. He walked through suspicion and solitude alike, and the North endured, though it never knew how near it had come at times to waking in fear. In time, the northern winds no longer sufficed to temper him. Though Aragorn's watch in Eriador was constant, tidings came more frequently from the south. Gondol stood vigilant against the gathering threat, and along its coasts the corsairs of Ummar grew bold. The Rohirrim guarded wide plains beside the White Mountains, yet their strength was ever tested by raids from the east. The world was stirring beyond the quiet fields of the Shire and the broken towers of Arnor. Aragorn perceived that if he were to measure himself against the age into which he had been born, he must walk further than the north. Knowledge of distant lands would be needed, an understanding of men who did not share the memory of fallen Arnor. So once more he left the familiar heaths behind. He journeyed southward through lands that grew gradually greener and more peopled. The air softened as he approached the Gap of Rolan, where the misty mountains and the White Mountains stand apart like watchful sentinels. There the wind moved differently, not sharp and solitary as in Eriador, but broad and rolling, sweeping unhindered across leagues of grass. When first he beheld the plains of the Mark, it seemed to him that the earth itself was in motion. The grasses bent in long silver waves beneath the sky, and horses moved across them as though born of wind and sunlight together. Their manes streamed like banners, their hooves struck rhythm upon the turf. Here was a land unlike the quiet north. The Rohirrim were not a hidden people. They rode openly, sang loudly, and honored strength plainly. Their speech rang clear and unadorned. They remembered their oaths to Gondor and kept them faithfully. Aragorn did not present himself as heir of Isildur. He came simply as a seasoned warrior seeking service, bearing the marks of many roads upon him. In those days, Thengel King ruled in Medisild, and though his years had been spent partly in Gondor, he had returned to lead his people with steadiness. It is said that Aragorn found favor quickly among the riders. He was swift to learn their tongue and courteous in their halls. Yet he did not seek renown beyond what duty required. He rode as one of many, not as one apart. The Rohirrim judged men by seat and sword. Aragorn proved both. He learned the rhythm of mounted warfare, the thunder of hooves across open ground, the discipline of ordered charge, the patience of waiting until the right moment to strike. In the north, he had mastered endurance and silence. In Rohan, he learned movement and force. Yet even amid the fellowship of lighters, he remained somewhat solitary, for the life of a ranger had shaped him deeply. While others feasted long and laughed loudly, he would sometimes step outside the hall and stand beneath the stars. The plains at night were vast and unshadowed. Above him the constellations wheeled, as they had over Númenor long ago, as they had over Elendil when first he came to Middle-earth. In such moments, he felt both the nearness of history and its distance. Though the Rohirrim were allies of Gondor and honorable indeed, they were not of Númenorian blood. Their songs were different, their memories shorter. He respected them, yet he knew his own path would carry him beyond their fields. Still, he gave them his strength faithfully. Raids from the east tested the borders. Bands of orcs sought to slip across the Anduin and harry the herds. Aragorn rode in pursuit more than once, guiding smaller companies with quiet precision. He did not boast of skill, yet word spread that the northern warrior saw further than most, and read signs others missed. Some wondered at his lineage. For though weathered, he bore himself with a certain natural authority. He did not press it forward, yet neither could he wholly conceal it. In Medisild he stood sometimes beside Thengel, offering counsel when asked. He spoke not often, but when he did, his words were measured and clear. Thengel, who had known the court of Gondor, perceived in him something of the high men of that realm. But Aragorn did not linger long enough for speculation to ripen into inquiry. His purpose in Rohan was not to establish claim, nor even to settle. It was to learn. He observed how a king commands loyalty not by lineage alone, but by presence among his people. He saw how the Rohirrim valued courage shown openly, and how swiftly they rallied to banners they trusted. And he considered how different the reclaiming of Gondor would be. For Gondor was not a kingdom of riders upon open plain. It was stone and river, and tower and memory. Its rule required patience, strategy, and the balancing of ancient pride. In Rohan he gathered strength of another kind, the strength of swift decision, of unity in motion. There were quiet evenings when minstrels sang of Eäril the Young and of the oath sworn to Sauron. Aragorn listened closely to such songs, for in them lay proof that alliances forged in honor, endure beyond generations. He did not speak then of Elendil or of Isildur. Those names he kept guarded still. Seasons turned upon the plains. Spring brought green renewal. Summer blazed bright. Autumn swept gold across the grasslands. Through each, Aragorn rode and served, gaining not only skill, but understanding of men whose hearts were open and fierce. Yet even as he grew respected among them, he felt the pull of another road. News reached Rohan of unrest along Gondor's coasts, and of boldness among the corsairs. Gondor's stewards sought capable captains, and Aragorn knew that the time had come to move again. He did not depart with ceremony. Those who had ridden beside him marked his going with clasped forearms and brief words. Thingel gave him thanks, and would have offered him greater standing had he remained. But Aragorn bowed and declined, speaking only that his road lay further yet. And so he left the wide plains behind. As he crossed again toward the White Mountains, he turned once to look back. The wind moved across the grasses, as it ever had. Riders in the distance were no more than dark shapes against gold. He carried with him no token of rank from Rohan, yet he bore something of its spirit. Swiftness in decision, strength in fellowship, courage shone plainly. These would serve him well in days yet unseen, for ahead lay Minas Tirith, and a name he would soon take upon himself. Thorongil. But that is for the next telling. When Aragorn came at last to Minas Tirith, he did not come as heir. He came as one more captain seeking service. The White City stood proud upon its hill of stone, 7 walls rising tier upon tier, gleaming pale beneath the sun. The great river flowed broad and watchful below, bearing both trade and rumor from distant lands. In its courts lingered memory of kings long departed, of victories won at terrible cost, of vigilance never fully laid aside. Aragorn beheld it first from afar, and his heart was stirred. Here had ruled his forefathers in their latter days. Here the white tree yet stood, though barren. Here the line of stewards had guarded a throne left empty. Yet he did not declare himself. Instead, he entered the city in plain gear, weathered by travel, and gave the name he had chosen, Thorongil, Eagle of the Star. It was a name suited to him, for he had watched long from hidden heights, and now he descended. Steward Ecthelion II was then Lord of Gondor, vigilant, discerning, and weary from years of strain against Mordor's growing shadow. He received many captains into his service, for Gondor's borders were never at ease. But Thorongil was not as other men. He spoke courteously and asked no favor. He did not boast of lineage, nor hint at former rank. Yet there was in him a steadiness that did not go unnoticed. Soon he was given command among the companies that guarded the eastern approaches and the coasts. There he showed both boldness and restraint. He did not rush where caution was needed, nor delay when swiftness would decide the matter, and began to trust him. His counsels were measured. He would listen long before speaking, and when he did speak, his words were clear and without ornament. Many perceived in him something of Númenórean bearing, though few dared name it so. In those days, Denethor, son of Ecthelion, also served Gondor. Keen of mind and strong of will, Denethor observed Thorongil closely. Between them lay neither open hostility nor friendship, but an awareness. For Denethor, proud and perceptive, sensed that Thorongil was no common captain. and Thorongil, for his part, perceived in Denethor a man both formidable and burdened, one who loved Gondor fiercely and would guard it at any cost. Thus they stood, two strong wills beneath the same banner, neither yielding nor clashing openly. It was upon the coasts that Thorongil's name grew greatest. The corsairs of Umbar had long troubled Gondor, descending in black ships upon southern havens and withdrawing before full muster could be made. Their raids were swift and cruel. Trade faltered. Fear lingered in fishing towns. Thorongil counseled a bold stroke. Rather than waiting upon defense, he urged that Gondor strike at Umbar itself, swiftly, secretly, and without prolonged siege. Such a plan required daring and discipline in equal measure. Ecthelion listened. At length he entrusted Thorongil with the venture. So it was that a fleet departed quietly, bearing men who knew not fully what glory or peril awaited them. Thorongil led not with trumpet nor proclamation, but with calm assurance. The voyage south was not without hardship. The seas off Umbar were treacherous, and the harbors well guarded. Yet by stealth and resolve, they came upon the corsair fleet at anchor. The assault was sudden. Fires rose against the night. Ships burned at mooring. Confusion seized the haven. Yet Thorongil's command was firm. Strike swiftly, withdraw without needless loss. He did not seek conquest of Umbar, only the breaking of its fangs. Before dawn, much of the corsair fleet was destroyed. The blow was heavy, and its echo resounded along Gondor's shores. Thorongil returned to Minas Tirith not in triumphal procession, but with ships bearing scars of battle and men weary yet alive. Gondor rejoiced, for a great threat had been diminished. Ecthelion's favor toward Thorongil deepened, yet with honor came scrutiny. Denethor's regard sharpened, for though he could not deny the captain's merit, he perceived also the affection Thorongil inspired among soldiers and common folk alike. Whispers stirred. Who was this northern captain whose counsel carried such weight? Whence came his authority? Why did he refuse advancement beyond what was offered? Thorongil did not answer such questions. Indeed, at the height of his renown, he did a thing few expected. He departed. No quarrel preceded his leaving. No disgrace compelled him. Rather, he sought private audience with Ecthelion and spoke words not recorded in any public chronicle. It is said only that he asked leave to go, and that leave was granted with reluctance. Before dawn one day, he was gone from Minas Tirith. Some thought him called back to northern kin. Others believed secret errand drew him eastward. Denethor alone perhaps guessed more, that Thorongil bore within him a destiny not yet revealed. For Aragorn had learned what he came to learn. He had seen Gondor's strength and its fragility. He had measured its captains, its temper, its pride. He had proven himself in its defense, not as claimant, but as servant. And he knew now that when the hour came, he would not stand before Gondor as stranger. He would return not to seek favor, but to fulfill inheritance. Yet that hour was not yet. So once more, he took the long road. He left behind a city of white stone and silent memory. He left behind honor freely offered and advancement easily gained. He chose instead the uncertainty of wandering. For kingship, he understood, is not secured by victory alone. It is secured by patience. And so Thorongil passed into rumor, his name lingering in Minas Tirith like the fading echo of an eagle's cry. But Aragorn, son of Aragorn, walked on beneath open sky, still uncrowned, still unseen by many for what he truly was. In later years, old veterans would speak quietly of him in the lower circles of the city. They would recall how he moved through the ranks without arrogance, how he shared the hardships of common soldiers, how he listened before commanding. Some said there was in his gaze a far-seeing quality, as though he weighed not only the present skirmish, but battles yet unborn. Denethor, too, did not forget him. Though he seldom spoke the name, it remained in memory. A northern captain who had risen swiftly and departed more swiftly still. In the years that followed, when the shadow lengthened and the burden of stewardship grew heavier, that memory would return. But far from Minas Tirith, the wanderer pressed on. He passed through Ithilien in secret, observing the movements of the enemy's servants. He ventured even into distant lands beyond the knowledge of Gondor's maps, learning what strength stirred in the east and south. Of those journeys, little is recorded, for Aragorn did not boast of them, yet they shaped him. He saw how fragile the realms of men had become. He saw courage and despair mingled together. He saw that the Stolim gathering was greater than border skirmishes or coastal raids, and he understood at last that the path to the throne would not be paved with acclaim, but with sacrifice. When Thorongil departed Minas Tirith, he did not ride in secrecy as one dismissed, nor in triumph as one acclaimed. His leaving was quiet, yet not concealed. Steward Ecphelion granted him leave with reluctance, and many in the city marked his absence with surprise. For he had risen swiftly in esteem, and few expected his service to end so abruptly. But Aragorn had long known that his road could not remain in Gondor. Though he had served faithfully and struck a grievous blow against Umbar, he had not come south to win renown. He had come to learn, and what he had learned weighed heavily upon him. The strength of Gondor was great in walls and lineage, yet its borders were strained. The vigilance of the steward was unceasing. In the east, beyond the Efelduath, Mordor stirred openly once more. Smoke rose where none had risen for years. The Nazgul had not yet revealed themselves in full terror, yet their influence crept outward. Aragorn perceived that the shadow would not be confined to Gondor alone. Therefore he turned his steps eastward for a time, passing beyond the lands well charted in Gondor's records. Of these journeys he spoke little thereafter, yet it is known among the wise that he travelled far into the east and south. He went not as captain nor as lord, but in disguise, bearing no token that might reveal his heritage. In those distant regions, he witnessed the reach of Sauron's will. Some realms were ruled by fear, their chieftains bound by tribute and threat. Others held memories of ancient enmities against the West, which Sauron was swift to inflame. Aragorn discerned also that many men there were not evil in heart, but misled or coerced. Tyranny had grown like a net about them. He observed and endured, learning what forces might one day march beneath the Reb's banner. He measured the discipline of armies not yet called to open war. He saw that the coming struggle would not be won by Gondor alone. At length, he turned west again. He passed in secrecy through Ithilien, where Gondor maintained a watch, though the land lay ever under threat. Rangers of Ithilien moved by stealth among the woods, and though Aragorn did not reveal himself openly, he aided them in quiet fashion where need arose. He noted the strengthening of enemy patrols and the rebuilding of fortifications beyond the mountains. It was plain that Sauron no longer hid his purpose. Crossing the Anduin, Aragorn journeyed northward through Rohan. Some among the Rohirrim remembered him dimly from years past, though time and hardship had altered his appearance. He did not tarry long in the mark, for his thought was set upon the north and the dwindling people entrusted to his care. When at last he came again into Eriador, the land greeted him as it always had, wide, windswept, and sparsely peopled. The ruins of Arnor stood unchanged, yet they seemed to him more fragile than before. For now he knew how vast were the designs forming in the east. The Dunedain received him with solemn welcome. Their numbers had lessened during his absence. Several had fallen in skirmishes, unrecorded beyond their own people. The watch had been maintained, yet the strain was evident. Aragorn resumed leadership not with ceremony, but with immediate purpose. Patrols were restructured. The Greenway was more closely observed. Tidings were gathered from Bree and from travelers passing north or west. He spoke then more openly with the rangers than he had before. Without revealing all he had seen, he warned that the shadow would not remain distant. Even the quiet Shire might in time feel its touch. Therefore, the watch upon its borders must be vigilant beyond former measure. In these years, his dealings with Gandalf deepened further. The wizard had long suspected that events of great import might hinge upon small and overlooked things. Chief among these was the Shire, whose obscurity might draw the enemy's search. Aragorn took this counsel to heart. He walked often along the bounds of that land, unseen by its inhabitants. He learned its lanes and hedgerows thoroughly. Strange wanderers were questioned at a distance. Suspicious tracks were followed and, when necessary, erased. The ranger's protection remained largely unknown, as was fitting. Yet danger drew nearer. In the year when Sauron openly declared himself in Mordor, Gandalf sought Aragorn with urgency. A creature long lost to rumor had been found, Gollum, once bearer of a ring of great peril. It was believed that knowledge might be wrung from him concerning its fate. Aragorn undertook the hunt. For many months he pursued Gollum through marsh and fen, through woodland and desolation. The creature was cunning, slipping through hidden paths and feeding upon what others would not touch. Yet Aragorn's endurance was greater. He tracked signs so faint that few could have discerned them. At last he captured Gollum in the dead marshes and bore him, though not without hardship, to the woodland realm in the north. This deed, though little heralded, would prove of grave consequence. Thus, while the wider world perceived only a wandering ranger, Aragorn labored at matters that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. Still, he did not press his claim to Gondor. Denethor had by then become steward, and his rule was stern and vigilant. Aragorn judged that the time was not ripe for revelation. Gondor must first face openly the shadow that threatened it. Only then might the heir return without sowing division. So the years of hidden watch continued, though they were now charged with expectation. Reports came that the Nine were abroad once more. Riders in black were seen upon distant roads. Fear traveled before them like a cold wind. Aragorn felt then that the long preparation of his life was nearing its end. He returned often to Rivendell in those days, seeking counsel with Elrond. There, the shards of Narsil were shown to him again, silent and waiting. He did not yet ask that they be reforged, but he knew the hour approached. In the north, the rangers kept their ceaseless vigil. In Bree, Strider remained a figure of wary respect. Among the hobbits, he was little more than a rumor. Yet beneath these quiet appearances lay readiness, for Aragorn had seen the breadth of the coming storm. He had walked in lands far from the White City and measured the strength gathering there. He had served among horse lords and among mariners. He had led men in battle and hunted alone in desolation. The wanderer had become seasoned beyond doubt. Thus, the long return to the north did not mark a retreat from greatness, but its final preparation. The hidden years were drawing toward their close, though few perceived it. And when at last the ring was found and set upon the road that led to Rivendell, Aragorn was no longer merely Strider of the Wild. He was ready. The years that followed Aragorn's return to the north were not idle, though to outward sight they appeared unchanged. The Rangers still kept their hidden watch. Bree remained wary but untroubled, and the Shire lay in quiet contentment. Yet beneath that seeming stillness, the weight of time pressed more heavily upon him than before. For Aragorn was no longer a young man newly come into his heritage. Though the blood of Númenor granted him length of days beyond that of other men, he felt the passing of seasons keenly. Friends among the Dúnedain aged beside him. Some fell in skirmishes, others in quiet illness. The line of the north did not renew itself swiftly. Each loss diminished not only their strength, but the memory of what had once been. He bore these losses without outward complaint, yet they deepened his resolve. In Rivendell, he would sometimes stand long in thought beside the shards of Narsil. The blade that had cut the ring from Sauron's hand lay broken still, as it had lain since the fall of Gil-galad and Elendil. It was both symbol and warning. Courage alone had not sufficed in that ancient war. Pride and haste had brought later ruin. If the sword were to be reforged, it must be at the right hour. Arwen's choice lay also upon him. Long had she dwelt in Lorien, and long years might pass between their meetings. Yet her fate was bound to his. Elrond had spoken plainly. Only if Aragorn claimed the kingship of both Gondor and Arnor would Arwen consent to forsake her immortal kindred. The condition was no mere test of ambition. It was safeguard against futility. For what would it avail her to surrender her undying life for a chieftain of a scattered people? Thus love in Aragorn's life was inseparable from destiny. He did not speak often of this burden, yet it shaped his patience. To seize his claim prematurely would risk division in Gondor. To delay too long might forfeit all. Meanwhile, the shadow advanced. In the year 2951 of the Third Age, Sauron openly declared himself in Mordor. Barad-dûr rose again. From that time onward, Gondor's vigilance grew more strained. Denethor, now steward, ruled with stern wisdom, yet he bore his task alone. No king returned to ease his burden. Aragorn watched and waited. His dealings with Gandalf became frequent and urgent. When at last word came that Gollum had revealed the name Baggins and the land of Shire under torment in Mordor, Aragorn understood fully that the quiet land he guarded would not remain untouched. The Nine were abroad. In that year he rode swiftly to warn those he could, yet events were already moving beyond concealment. Black riders entered Eredor. The watch of the Rangers was stretched thin. Aragorn himself crossed paths with the Nazgûl more than once, though he avoided direct confrontation when prudence required. These were not foes to be lightly engaged. It was then that the long-hidden strands of his life drew together. At Bree, he encountered 4 hobbits fleeing from the riders. To them, he was Strider, suspicious and weatherworn. Yet in that moment, he perceived that his years of preparation had reached their purpose. He guided them through the wild, guarded them against pursuit, and led them at last to Rivendell. There, before the Council of Elrond, he revealed openly what many had guessed. He was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur. The shards of Narsil were brought forth. The sword was reforged and named Andúril, Flame of the West. It was no longer time for concealment. Yet even then, he did not seize authority by proclamation. The fellowship that departed Rivendell did so under shared counsel, not under his command alone. Aragorn accepted the burden of leadership only as necessity required, and after Gandalf's fall in Moria, he bore that burden with reluctance rather than pride. In these events, the weight of his hidden years became evident. He had learned endurance in the north, strategy in Gondor, swift action in Rohan, and patience in distant lands. He had walked among humble folk and among captains. He had known obscurity and honor, suspicion and trust. Thus, when the War of the Ring unfolded, he was not untested. Yet even amid great deeds, the path of the dead, the mustering of the Grey Company, the sailing of the black ships captured from the corsairs, he did not forget the cost that lay beneath triumph. Many fell in that war. Among them were men who had known him only as Thorongil or as Strider. The crown he would at last accept was not ornament, but burden fulfilled. When he entered Minas Tirith after the defeat of Sauron, he did not do so as stranger. Many remembered Thorongil. Some guessed at last the truth long concealed. Denethor had fallen, and the line of stewards passed to Faramir, who recognized in Aragorn both rightful king and worthy ally. Thus Elisar Telcontar was crowned, but the years that followed did not erase the memory of wandering. He renewed the watch upon the north. He restored Arnor in name and governance, though its lands remain sparsely peopled. He honored the Rohirrim and upheld the oath between their realms. He treated former foes with measured mercy, knowing from his travels that not all who marched against Gondor had done so freely. Arwen came to Minas Tirith and chose mortality, as she had long resolved to do. In her choice, the long waiting of decades found its answer. And yet the weight of years remained with Aragorn, even in peace. For he remembered the long solitude of his youth, the silent patrols beneath cold stars, the hidden labors unpraised. Those years had forged him more surely than any battle. They had taught him that kingship is service first and authority second. When at last his own end approached, many years later, he laid himself down willingly, as the Númenóreans of old had done, in wisdom rather than in fear. He did not cling to life beyond its appointed span. In this also the hidden years bore fruit. For a man who has long walked in shadow does not fear the setting of the sun. He knows that dawn and dusk alike belong to the same world. Thus the weight of years, once born in solitude, became the foundation of a reign remembered not only for victory, but for justice and restraint. And in the annals of Gondor and Arnor, it is written that the wanderer, who was called Strider, proved greater in patience than in war, and greater in humility than in triumph. When Aragorn was crowned King Elisar in the year 1319 of the Third Age, many beheld in him the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. The white tree blossomed again in the courts of Minas Tirith. The banner of Elendil was unfurled. The scepter of Anúminas was restored to the north. To outward sight, it seemed that a king had arisen suddenly in the hour of greatest need. Yet those who looked more closely perceived that nothing about his reign was sudden. The kingship had been long in preparation. It had been tempered in the cold watch of Eriador, where no herald announced his labors. It had been tested upon the plains of Rohan, and proven upon the decks of burning ships before Umbar. It had been sharpened by journeys beyond the knowledge of Gondor's maps, where he had seen both the cruelty of the enemy and the frailty of men. Thus, when the crown was set upon his brow, it rested not upon untried ambition, but upon endurance. In the early years of his reign, he labored tirelessly to heal what war had broken. Gondor's walls were repaired, yet more importantly, its confidence restored. Trade resumed along the Anduin and across the coasts once harried by corsairs. Faramir was confirmed as Prince of Ithilien, and that land, long desolate, began again to bear fruit. But Aragorn's concern did not rest with Gondor alone. He did not forget Arnor. Though the north remained sparsely inhabited and its cities in ruin, he restored its kingship in law and memory. Annúminas was renewed as seat of the northern realm, and the Dunedain no longer wandered without recognition. Yet he did not summon multitudes to repopulate those lands hastily. He understood that kingdoms grow as trees do, slowly, from deep roots. The Shire he placed under his protection formally, though he forbade men to enter it without leave. In this he showed not condescension, but respect. The small folk whose courage had altered the fate of the world were to remain free in their own manner. Such judgments bore the mark of long reflection. For Aragorn had lived as wanderer among the humble. He knew that strength does not lie solely in towers and battlements. It lies also in quiet fields and steadfast hearts. In dealing with former enemies, he showed discernment. To the south and east he sent envoys, not armies alone. He remembered what he had seen in distant lands, that many had fought under Sauron's banner through fear or compulsion. Where peace could be forged without folly, he sought it. Yet mercy did not weaken vigilance. The watch on Mordor was maintained, though the Dark Tower had fallen. Garrisons remained in Ithilien. The alliance with Rohan was renewed and strengthened, not merely by oath, but by friendship. In council, he was patient. Those who served him observed that he listened more than he spoke. The pride that had undone Isildur did not take root in him. He had spent too many years unknown to be seduced by sudden authority. Often he would recall the long-hidden years when decisions were made alone, beneath open sky. In comparison, the throne seemed less a seat of power than a place of responsibility. Arwen stood beside him as Queen Hundomiel, and her presence brought grace to the court of Gondor. In her choice to embrace mortality, the long story of the half-elven was brought to its final chapter. Aragorn never treated that choice lightly. He ruled in such a way as to justify the sacrifice she had made. To his people, he was both distant and accessible. In ceremony, he bore himself with dignity, befitting the house of Elendil. Yet he would ride often through the realm without great escort, observing with his own eyes the condition of roads and villages. He spoke readily with soldiers and farmers alike, recalling perhaps his own years among them. It is said that when disputes arose among nobles of Gondor concerning ancient privileges, Aragorn would sometimes answer not by citing lineage, but by recounting the hardships endured during the war. Such reminders tempered pride. He did not seek to eclipse the stewards, who had ruled faithfully in the absence of kings. Rather, he honored their service and ensured that their dignity remained intact. In this, he healed a potential division before it could take root. Years passed in peace, seldom known since the elder days. Children were born who had no memory of the Black Shadow. Trade flourished between north and south. the white tree grew tall once more. Yet Aragorn never forgot that all kingdoms of men are bound to time. When his own years had reached 120, and he perceived that his strength was diminishing, he chose to lay down his life willingly, as had the ancient kings of Numenor in wisdom before pride had corrupted their line. He did not cling to the throne, nor wait for decay to overtake him. In this final act, the hidden years spoke again. For a man who has walked long in uncertainty does not fear the appointed end. He understands that authority is held in trust, not possessed outright. Before his passing, he commended the realm to his son Eldarion, ensuring that the line would continue in strength. To Arwen, he spoke words of sorrow and consolation, knowing that her path would now lead her to grief no mortal king could shield her from. Thus ended the life of Aragorn Elessar. Yet, when scholars consider his reign, they find that its greatness did not arise solely from victory over Sauron. It arose from the decades before the war, decades spent in obscurity, discipline, and restraint. He had been king in spirit long before he wore a crown. When he guarded the Shire unseen, he acted as king. When he refused honor in Minas Tirith and departed quietly, he acted as king. When he rode beneath foreign stars to learn the strength of distant peoples, he acted as king. The coronation merely revealed what had long been true. And so his life stands as testament that greatness is seldom forged in sudden triumph. It is shaped in patience, in hardship endured without witness, in choices made when no herald stands nearby. The wanderer called Strider walked roads few chroniclers marked, yet those roads led at last to renewal for two realms. In remembering the hidden years, we understand the crown more clearly. For the king who returned was not fashioned in a single hour of war, but across long seasons of quiet watchfulness. And in that truth lies perhaps the deepest lesson of his life. And if you have walked these long hidden years with him, consider following this channel and lending your support with a like, that more such tales of Middle-earth may be told.